Over to you, Alison.
Okay, so I would like to welcome everyone to this webinar. Most of you, I'm Alison Denton. Most of you will know me. I've seen the list of attendees, so thank you for joining us. I think many of you have had some contact with Edinburgh Coaching Academy, so you'll know me as one of the founding directors of Edinburgh Coaching Academy, along with Diane and Joanne. We are delighted to welcome David Clutterbuck today onto this webinar to talk about mentoring and can you afford not to have a mentoring program. David, I'm sure, doesn't really need any introduction. You'll all have heard of David, I'm sure, in your roles within your organisations. We always refer to David as a guru around coaching and mentoring, and I actually looked up the word guru today, and the first thing that came up was a Hindu spiritual leader, but that's not what we mean when we refer to David as a guru. The second definition was an influential teacher or popular expert, and I think we can all agree that fits. David fits that bill very well, given that he's written or co-authored around 70 books around leadership, coaching and mentoring and talent management. He's a visiting professor at 4 universities, a special ambassador of EMCC and a co-founder of EMCC, and he works all over the globe. David, we're very thrilled to welcome you today. The focus of today, as I say, is going to be mentoring. The format's going to be around 25 minutes. David's got a presentation for us, and hopefully you can all see the slides. If you do have any questions, please use the chat box to type your questions in. Everybody's muted at the moment for the presentation, but if you could type your questions into the box, and we will gather those up and have about 20 minutes to answer those questions at the end. So David, I will hand over to you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alison. So welcome, everybody. So mentoring is one of those things that's been around for thousands of years. The concept of the word mentor goes back to the Odyssey, so at least 800 BC, when the goddess Athena was who took it upon herself to sit down with Odysseus, the king of Ithaca, when he was on his travels and having adventures, and help him reflect upon, and this connection with wisdom is maintained all the way through. Mentoring is about helping one person become, using your wisdom to help somebody else become wiser, and so it's very much something that's needed in all walks of life. We see around us so leaders and leadership that's devoid of judgment, that it's devoid of wisdom. And I'm minded of something that came across my desk just an hour ago, which had me laughing a great deal. It had got pictures of George Washington, Donald Trump, and Boris Johnson. And George Washington is saying, "I cannot tell a lie," and Donald Trump is saying, "I cannot tell the truth," and Boris Johnson is saying, "I cannot tell the difference." And I thought, in terms of wisdom, there's a lack of wisdom in the latter two, and in so many leaders that we see. So what I'm going to do is just explore what mentoring means and what it means to have a good mentoring program in a company. Here we are. This is a neat little definition. It's a helping relationship based on an exchange of knowledge, experience, and goodwill. And it's the exchange because a lot of mentoring is reverse mentoring. I've just been talking with Bank of America, where their lesbian and gay community are mentoring senior managers to help them understand diversity. A great program. Mentors help somebody less experienced gain confidence, clearer purpose, insight, and again this word, wisdom. In developmental mentoring, the mentor too is changed by the relationship. So mentors learn as much as mentees. In fact, many companies actually introduce mentoring specifically with the idea of helping to grow the mentors by getting them to go out and work with people outside of their team in an environment, a learning environment, where they can experiment with developmental behaviors and developmental conversations, and then bring those skills back into their own work, into their own team. So it's a safe environment. So if you want to have a coaching culture in an organization, the starting point is to have a mentoring program. And that seems to be a constant message from those organizations that have tried it. If we look at both coaching and mentoring, basically what they're doing is having conversations that enable people to understand, firstly, their internal context. What's going on for them? What are their values, their strengths and weaknesses, their aspirations? How do they get? What's the level of their self-confidence? What kind of person are they? What kind of person are they trying to become? How do they make sense of their internal experiences? And then also, mentoring and coaching help people understand the external context. So, what are the opportunities out there? What is to manage their reputation? Who's in their network who's supporting them? What are the possible career paths they could take? How do they influence the organization, and so forth? And what mentoring and coaching both do is to link those two conversations. Now, to a certain extent, you can say that there is a minor difference. That to a small extent, coaching puts a little bit more emphasis on that internal context, and mentoring a bit more emphasis on that external context. But they both enable the person to think more deeply and make better decisions based upon linking their understanding of their internal world and their understanding of the external world. And this is what makes mentoring such a powerful process. Sorry, did I just press 2 there by chance? Yeah. Okay. So looking again, what coaching is, benefit mentoring. Coaching focuses typically on performance and skills issues. Mentoring much more on career and more holistic development and how you grow into roles. Mentoring's much more about helping people to become mature, if you like, to grow up. And maybe that's one of the problems with many organizations, that some of the people at the top are still operating as if at a level of socio-emotional maturity of a teenager. So how do we actually, so one of the roles of a mentor to help people become wiser and more mature. So some of the myths about mentoring, it's not more directive than coaching. In fact, all of the literature on mentoring, predominantly, it is a non-directive behavior. It's helping people to reflect on their experience and to learn from it. It's not always senior to junior. We just talked a little bit about reverse mentoring. Informal mentoring is not better than formal. Informal mentoring actually tends, where people just choose their own mentor, tends to reinforce the barriers against diversity, because people choosing people like themselves to mentor or as a mentor, that means that the people who are different get excluded. So informal mentoring, but basically the ideal combination is a formal mentoring program in which people learn to be highly informal across the hierarchy levels. It's not about knowledge transfer either. It's always been about the development of wisdom. Of course, there'll be a little bit of knowledge transfer, but that's not the key. So lots of benefits for the mentor, getting a different perspective on issues, challenge their assumptions, understanding the politics of an organization. I mean, I know that none of your organizations have any politics, but nonetheless, how to manage your reputation, how to build the networks, the networks of influence and the networks of information that you need to manage your role and your, where you can just talk about things that worry you, helping you to make better career choices. Most people's careers happen to them rather than are managed by them. And there's a happy medium in between there. An overmanaged career tends not to be that successful, but equally an undermanaged one loses so many opportunities. And helping people become more self-aware, more self-confident. One of the big issues that we find is that for so many mentors, one of the issues they work on with people is this phenomenon that's I'm losing my imposter syndrome. And in discussion this morning with the charity sector, it's a big problem. a significant number of leaders within the charity sector have now come out and said, actually, imposter syndrome is something that I suffer. I feel I'm not worthy to be in the role that I'm in. Mentors can help you to actually rediscover just how brilliant you are. For the mentor, you can experiment with different approaches. You get a challenge to your assumptions too, particularly from somebody from a different generation. You have a reputation as somebody who develops other people. You get to learn about other generations. You tend to increase your own self-confidence. In one study in Norway, it was found that mentors of women making the transition onto public sector boards, or private sector boards rather, actually the majority of mentors increased in confidence in their role, as well as the majority of mentees. It feels good to see somebody else grow, just like your own children. And if you're inside a company, then it's the best way of all of getting to know the talent in that organization. So there's many benefits for everybody. For the line manager, it's actually good for somebody to give them a second opinion, so that the mentee gets to understand that maybe their own perspective is not the only one, but sometimes that their line manager has a point. We see significant improvements in the mentee's quality of relationships with both the line manager and their colleagues. It helps to share the developmental responsibility, but the line manager should, of course, not abdicate it. By and large, people who have a mentor are more willing to take or to be delegated responsibilities to than people who do not. And for the company, we know that at least 1/3 higher retention over any given period is recorded for those people who have a mentor versus those people who don't. That's pretty substantial. We know that mentoring is associated with higher employee engagement, higher strategic. Intriguingly, a recent study by the Sloan Business Review found that even at the top of large organizations, less than a third of directors actually agreed upon what their company's business priorities were. That's pretty grim. So actually focusing on getting everybody on the same page is really valuable. Communication, for example, between the field and headquarters, where you have mentors in one place and mentees in the other. It really supports good, informed succession planning, and it helps you to build a learning culture. So all of these things are basic benefits that you would see time and time again, where you have a well-constructed mentoring program. And I do iterate a well-constructed mentoring program. So when we think of mentoring strategically, we see it used to support all of these things. So talent management, identifying and keeping the talent that you want. Diversity management, making sure that people who are different get to senior positions and get real opportunities. Performance management, performance management systems are having to change radically, putting more control in and more ownership in the hands of the employee rather than their boss. Mentoring is one of the steps by which we can actually make that much more comfortable. And culture change, career planning, and any significant role transition. Whenever somebody goes along the management pipeline, for example, the leadership pipeline, when you move from managing yourself to managing other people, or from managing other people to managing managers, or from managing managers to managing a function, and so forth, each of those transitions requires a radical change in thinking. Having somebody who's made that transition before is incredibly helpful. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the masses of different kinds of applications. I'm just going to pull a few out here. One of my favorites is a program in Canada that takes women professional women from countries, war-torn countries, who have come to Canada for a new life. So they are refugees, and all of them also have AIDS. And so their qualifications aren't recognized in the new country. They have nothing. They have no connections in the new community. Mentoring actually helps them to settle in, feel wanted, supports them through getting requalified, and all of those things to make them feel that they belong. And I think that's a wonderful thing to do. Maternity mentoring. we found there's a massive increase in the proportion of women that come back to an organization if they have a mentoring program in place. And the speed with which they get back up to speed, or the time it takes, is much, much less. So other things, disadvantaged children at school. I've actually got a program we're launching next year, which is aimed at getting 5 million school-age mentors globally. Because we recognize that if kids have the skills to be a mentor and be mentored at that early age, they can take those into the workplace. It's going to stand them in great stead for their careers thereafter. We have a program with the National Health Service to create ethical mentors, people who help doctors and others work through those dilemmas that are so difficult to where you've got conflicting values. How do you know what's the right thing to do? Ethical mentors are people who have mentoring skills, plus they've been equipped with an understanding of the psychology of ethicality. A major benefit to in the health service, and these ethical mentors, they are certainly kept busy. So that's just some of the things. And people can have a mentor or be a mentor any point in their life, all the way from the age of 8. We found people actually being able to be effective mentors, quite remarkably. And the kids learn it a lot faster than the adults. Mentoring is not sponsorship. The idea, Sheryl Sandberg of Facebook said women need sponsors, not mentors. To a certain extent, it may be true. But mixing sponsorship and mentoring is not very clever. So what happened, there's a long history behind how the American academics and others managed to confuse sponsorship with mentorship, but they basically don't work together. When you put them together, you actually undermine both, because one is a relationship of total openness and confidence. When you have a sponsor, there's no way you can be totally honest with them, because you want them to present you in your best light, and all the power. You want them to use their power and influence on you. In the mentoring relationship, there is no power, or you work to minimize the power between you. So sponsorship, yes, you can have a sponsorship program. People like Rank have a separate sponsorship work program for women, but these women also have had advantage of mentoring as well, but not the two things together. And then, if we're looking at how you make mentoring work, the international standards through the MCC look at your mentoring program from these 6 elements. What is it there for? Does everybody understand why it's there? How do you actually train people? We know that if you don't train anybody, the maximum benefit you get is 1 in 3 relationships will deliver significant value. If you train just the mentors, you double that. If you train the mentees as well, you push that to well over 90%. And if you educate the system, it pushes way up into the high 90s. How do you select and match people? Big issues there. How do you measure and review, making sure that it's working? The ethical standards, and how just basic administration and support, keeping people, helping the relationships along, nurturing them, providing them with just enough support for them to feel that somebody wants them to succeed, but at the same time, not making them feel that it's overly bureaucratic. So some of the things in a good program design, you need a good rationale for it. You need to look at the stakeholders. You need to be very clear about who your mentors and mentees are going to be and why. You need to market it very well. You need to train people and prepare them. So initially and subsequently too. You need that training is not just a one-off. It's an ongoing process as you help to educate them. Once you've matched them, you need to support them through a whole series of crises, making sure if you've got a steering group, for example, it keeps in touch with everybody just to make sure that everything is going right, so you can troubleshoot early. And then you review, evaluate, you put it into, you take what you've learned and put it into the next iteration of the program. And all good, well-founded mentoring programs seem to fit this model. We evaluate for all these different reasons, because we want to troubleshoot, we want to improve the program next, we want to motivate more people to join. All of these things here, I'm not going to read them all out. Motivating key sponsors is an important one too, undoubtedly. But all of these things, these are great reasons. We do need to evaluate at the end. And what we find is the more time you spend up front planning the program, the better the evaluation is. So you look at the evaluation of the individual development. So how have people developed? How's the relationship developed? And what has the program delivered? What impact has it, for example, had on retention? We find it's important to review when you're planning, when you're selecting and training. After the first few meetings, see how is it going? Do we need to intervene? Longer term as it progresses, and at the end of the relationship and the end of the program. So all of these points are points at which you might want to review and evaluate what's going on. So the kind of things that go wrong: poor planning, just not thinking about it enough. Poor selection of mentors, just taking anybody. There was a great program in the youth justice system in Birmingham, looking at people coming out of jail, young people, and equipping them with mentors from the community, many of whom were long-term unemployed. But none of them had been in trouble with the law. The mentors and the mentees got together, 22 of them, 42 of them. After 2 years, it was evaluated. Not one of them had been in trouble again. And many of the mentors who were long-term unemployed had actually got themselves jobs because they got so enthused by helping this younger person to back into the world of work and getting their life sorted. But then this program, when it was rolled out, they just they cut most of the training out. They selected people. They put much less time into the selecting people. Almost anybody that was warm and hadn't got a criminal record, and the recidivism rate went up. I can't remember what the exact figure was, but it was well over 50% of the people in the rollout scheme were back in trouble. The impact of poor selection of mentors is enormous. So if you don't train people enough, the program's not going to work well. If people don't know why they're there, which is obviously training helps to cover that, it won't work. If it's too formal, we've seen programs where people have got to fill in a form at the end of every mentoring meeting. That's not conducive to real conversations. Not knowing what the outcomes are, just expecting people to take on too many mentees, that won't work either. And just a failure of support from above. Nobody seems to be interested in the organization. Why should I bother? So we talked about relationship droop. It can be a common problem. So we sustain it by measuring, at least at 6 months, looking at what happens when people move on. Have you got a replacement group coming in? Who could they recommend? The question: who will make a fuss if the program dies? Putting together your network of champions. If the program achieves its original aims, do you close it down, or do you actually say, okay, do we actually change those aims and continue with it? These are all questions that are really important for HR to consider. Launching new programs aimed at different target groups, and then using the people from the original groups to actually support them and be part of that process. And the more that you can link mentoring with the kind of culture change the organization wants, the more likely the organization is to sustain it. So we talked about ethical coach mentoring. We talked professional mentoring is growing in that. A number of countries have mentoring academies where retiring executives instead of becoming coaches, which they perceive as more down market in their area. They don't want to become consultants, definitely, and they don't want to become coaches. They want to become mentors because they could use their experience. So very often mentoring is described as coaching plus. So the plus is experience, but the wisdom to use it in a way that is non-directive. And the research of maternity coaching and mentoring and cascade mentoring, we've already talked. Having a mentor or being a mentor throughout your entire life. And that's a wonderful thing to mentor or both at the same time at any point in your career. We've even seen people being mentored into death, although I don't think the mentors have been there before. Consequences of not having mentor, it's so much harder to have a coaching culture. It's harder to attract talent. It's harder to retain your talent. It's harder to spot your talent. It's harder to overcome the cultural clashes that happen between generations, and those are becoming more and more frequent. It's harder to get people to take responsibility for their own learning and their own careers. And this lovely question: Why would talented people want to work for an organization that doesn't appear to value their career and personal growth? I think that is a fundamental question to ask, not just of HR, but the whole top team of an organization. So that's my presentation. I hope I've covered some interesting things for you. We're now open for questions. And I think if we unmute everybody, that would be good.
Yes, thank you so much, David. I mean, you packed a whole lot of stuff in there around mentoring programs. Can I just, while we're waiting for perhaps some questions to come through, while people are having a think about questions, I wondered if you talked at the beginning of the importance you would recommend, if you like, organisations having a mentoring program before a coaching program, and yet so many organisations we work with start with coaching. Could you talk a little bit more about the benefits of starting with mentoring rather than coaching?
Yeah, we did a little piece of research. Okay. I'm gonna mute Chris. I don't know what happened there, Chris, but you've got a very noisy dog there. Okay. So yeah, we did this piece of research. It was very sort of what I call quick research, quick and dirty. We just asked lots of people what happened when your line manager went on line manager's coach course, and how effective was it? And in many cases, what happened, unless it was really well supported afterwards, basically the line manager went back to normal for a whole variety of reasons. A lot of them to do with conflict of roles between being somebody you can trust and somebody in charge of your discipline. There's so many contradictions there. It's quite difficult for a line manager to be a really effective coach to begin with. They can indeed they can learn to do it. Okay, I'm going to mute. Okay, we have a lot of noise on the line. But you can be an effective line manager coach, but you need to do it with the support of your team. And so if you're not ready to do that, and that requires a lot of confidence in a line manager, then in learning to be a mentor and then going and being able to do that, my goodness me, we are getting.
You know what? I'm coming out.
Storage space for them.
Okay. We've got quite a lot of noise on the line. Okay. Okay. So if you have got a noisy background, could you just mute yourself? Okay, good. Just unmute yourself when you want to say something. So yeah, if you are able as a line manager to go out and become a mentor to somebody else, you can practice all those things on somebody else's direct report. And if you screw it up, it's no problem of yours. I mean cynical there, but it does make it easier if the consequences of getting it wrong are much less.
Yeah.
So that's a large part of it.
Yes, no, that's helpful, and I know a lot of the people that are on the webinar are actually in that role, so they're coaches, but also they're line managers, and I think that's really helpful, for them to think about in terms of the most appropriate relationship for them.
Indeed, there's a question here that somebody's putting. Will we get the slides? Yes, you can have the slides. Alison will make sure that they get distributed.
Yeah.
So any other questions? I've unmuted those people that are quiet or in a quiet background. So if you see your little green button beside yourself, then you should be fine. You may need to unmute yourself otherwise. So, okay. So who'd like to? Okay. Who'd like to come in and ask any questions?
Hi, David. My name is Bonnie. I'm not sure if you can hear me okay.
Oh, I can, yeah.
Thanks so much for sharing with us today. It's really interesting. I'm just curious to know if you have a mentor yourself and what's been the best experience that you've had if you've had a mentor.
You faded out there for a second. You're curious to know which? I'm sorry.
To know if you have a mentor now, and if you have had a mentor,
right.
What has worked best for you? What's been the most productive relationship?
I've had many mentors in my life. They've ranged from the absolutely brilliant to the absolutely awful, but even the absolutely awful have been useful. I think of the worst mentor I had. I only saw him about 3 times. When I was in McGraw Hill, the publishing company, and he really took no interest in me. And then one day he instructed me to fly over to New York. And took me to his club to sit down for a meeting and said, basically, David, you're an anomaly. Said you're the most senior non-American in the company, and basically normally we'd have an American in your role. So I have to tell you that what's going to happen is we're going to put an American over you, and essentially you'll be moved slightly aside, but that's the consequence of the way that the politics in this organisation works. That was the day, of course, I decided to leave. But that was nobody else had the honesty to tell me about how the corporate politics worked. So that guy did me a great favour. But that was the worst mentor I ever had. Okay. And the best mentor, oh God, there've been so many of them. One of the ones that I find I have a young Down son with autism, so he's got the mental age of 6. But the conversations I have with Jonathan bring me back down to earth. In so many ways, he's a little mentor to me.
Thank you so much, David. Just sort of like following on from that, it sounds like that one of the benefits is that even if you there are benefits of even being a bad mentor. You know, if you are a mentee, you can spot opportunities even if your mentor isn't particularly talented as a mentor. Absolutely.
One of the things we often find is that a mentor is likely to become a role model. And depending how you use that role model, sometimes the mentor that you're assigned a mentor, and you see them, they could be a wonderful example of how not to be.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Who'd like to come on next? Okay, I've got a question here from Irene, so I'm going to respond to that. Irene says, "How do you see mentoring helping the drive for diversity?" I'm going to. Right, I'm muting people in noisy backgrounds. So Irene says, "How do you see mentoring helping the drive for diversity? Not just in the usual types of diversity, gender, ethnic, generational, but helping people with diverse perspectives thrive in an organization?" I think it's fundamental. We have doing a lot of work in terms of team coaching, which and in that whole context of team coaching, it's really important. Okay, we've got some interference on the line again. I can't see where it's coming from. Okay, I'm gonna mute all. Okay, that's better. And what we're finding in team coaching is that teams that are highly diverse but have good norms of how you work with that diversity, they tend to be the most productive and the most creative and have the highest performance. If you've got teams which are diverse but without that those norms of how you value each other's diversity, then they can be much less productive. So it's how do you actually create that valuing? And I think what mentoring does is to open people's eyes up to having conversations across the barriers of difference. There's something we call that we developed 30 years ago called the diversity awareness ladder. And basically what that looks at is the conversations that could happen but don't happen most of the time. So at the very bottom of the ladder, the emotion that people feel when they see somebody different from themselves is fear. And so the fear stops you having a conversation with them. You cross the street to avoid the young hoodie, for example. But if you say to you, have the conversation with yourself, so what am I afraid of here? What might they be afraid of? Might they be afraid of me? And if you then have the conversation with them to ask them, well, how do you see people like me? What do you perceive when you see me? You've opened up the opportunity to move away from fear and start and get onto the next rung of the ladder. And the rungs of the ladder, the next one is wariness. The next one is tolerance. The next one is acceptance, and when you get to the level of appreciation of people's difference from all perspectives, you suddenly begin to realize just how wonderful it is to have people around you who don't think the same as you. Have we got any other questions? Yeah, let's go around. Okay, so Chris is asking, I'm early on in my formal career and work as an external coach. Does the mentor need to have a knowledge of the organization or sector of the mentee, or can the mentor work despite not knowing the sector as a coach can? Now, this is a fascinating one because there's an assumption, there's a myth that coaches don't need to understand anything about the world the other person is in. That tends to be associated with fairly low-level skills of behavioral coaching, but not or performance coaching. But when you need to really help somebody gain an insight into themselves and their environment, it really helps a lot if you have some experience that you can use to draw on to craft the powerful questions, instead of just using the rote questions, on a scale of 1 to 10, or if you did have the answer, what would it be? We did this about 20 years ago in Scotland. We did a piece of research with one of the public sector bodies about what annoyed coaching clients most, and it was questions like that that were repeated, where they felt manipulated. So in order to ask really insightful questions, we have to have some understanding of the other person's world. Now, that doesn't mean to say we've done the same job as they've done. I mean, a leadership role is a leadership role. But and indeed, if there's a thin line here, there's a balance here between knowing their role too much or too well, which prompts us to become too much of an expert, and to be thinking constantly, well, this is what I would do, and not knowing enough about it. So it's a balance. The critical issue is: do we end up giving advice, or do we end up giving context, or do we do nothing, or give them nothing at all? Purist coaching texts would say you give them nothing at all, and clients find that really, really annoying, frustrating. If you give people advice, you're doing the thinking for them. If you give people context, you're providing them with relevant information that enables them to make a better decision. And coaching basically sits somewhere between advice giving and mentoring, or coaching and mentoring. They circle around this particular spectrum, and both of them are valuable. But the more that you understand, the more of the other person's world, the more and the more that you are in a coaching or mentoring mind frame, the more helpful you can be. Does that make sense? Do you want to come back in, Chris? If we find you and unmute you, we can let you come back in and speak on that one. We've unmuted you, Chris. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I've always thought that a degree of knowledge of the sector or the industry would be helpful. and the coaching that I've been doing has been within the sectors I used to work in. And I think that mentoring, that sort of dance round between advice, coaching and mentoring, is an exciting place to be in. I've spent years trying to avoid giving advice.
Brilliant. Yes. Yes. I think the moment it's a bit like when we say in the coaching conversation or mentoring conversation, if you think you've understood everything, then it's time to really listen.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot there's a lot of truth in that. There's a great question also from Guy, building on this. Is there room in the market for the hybrid of coach and mentor? And if so, when? Well, the fascinating thing, we've run programs from professional coach to professional mentor. And the more experienced the coach is, the more that they find that they have actually been being a hybrid of coach and mentor, and sometimes feeling guilty about it. And this is one of the things that helps them not to feel guilty about it. So the only reason to feel guilty about it is if you are trying to be a mentor in the American style, which is very, very directive. But if you're trying to be a genuine mentor, helping somebody to reflect and learn from their experience, then there really is that's exactly where we want to be, at that higher level of coaching. And then, so Guy, did you want to come back on that? If I can find you, I'll unmute you too. There we go. Did you want to comment on that, Guy? You'd have to unmute yourself.
Thank you so much, David. Really insightful. Not really. I think that really sums it up for me. That's one of my. I'm at the start of my journey, and as I said in the brackets at the end of it, Alison will be smiling at this, because I have this challenge within myself of this. I often find myself coaching. I'm understanding a lot more about coaching now, and I often find myself, certainly at the start of the journey, doing too much mentoring when I could have done coaching. But now I'm getting a really good understanding of what they are, and the more confident I get, the more I have the ability to tap in and out of it, which is really, I find it a lot more powerful.
Brilliant, thank you. So Bridget asked, do you think we should have different mentors for different things? For example, a mentor with a function area of expertise and a different mentor who can help with career planning? Absolutely. You can have as many as you like, and they can overlap. It depends what you want them for. So I can think I had one at one stage when I was selling my one of my businesses. I had a mentor with somebody who'd done that many times before, and this was a fairly transactional mentoring relationship, but it was really helpful, him getting me to think about the things that I hadn't thought about. Same time, my longtime co-mentor and co-author David Megginson and I would go for long walks together and really challenge each other about our thinking and assumptions about all sorts of things. So different mentors for different things, absolutely. Okay, anybody else? I think, have I missed anybody's comments? No, I think we've got all of the comments so far. Does anybody else like to say anything else? Say something else. If you raise your hand, we can unmute you. Okay, it looks as though we've answered all the questions. If you have further questions, please come back to Alison or myself. You can, if you are so minded, those of you who are in corporate HR, you can actually now qualify as an accredited mentoring program manager. So that's quite a nice thing to do. And there's a virtual program that allows you to do that now, been piloted this year very successfully. I can end by saying I think mentoring is such a powerful tool. It does so much for organizations. And if you have both mentoring and coaching in your organization, you can really achieve a great deal more than an organization that just bumbles along and hopes people are going to take charge of their own careers, or tries to manage people's careers for them. It's a joy being a mentor. It's given me more pleasure than almost anything else in life. So thank you, everybody. Alison, do you want to wrap us up? Alison, are you still there?
Alison, thank you, David. Yeah, sorry, I was muted there. Thank you, David. I'd just like to thank you for taking the time. I think you've covered so much in that, and you know, so many kind of interesting perspectives around mentoring. We could kind of talk about this all evening. I'd also like to thank everybody who's attended. Really, you know, grateful for you to take the time to join us this afternoon. And I think, as I say, most of you already know Edinburgh Coaching Academy, but if anybody does want any information, further information, so we partner with David to run his mentoring programs up in Scotland. If anybody does want any more information, please do get in touch, and we're always happy to have a chat. So thank you so much, David. We really appreciate your support in doing this today. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Have a good evening, everybody. Bye then.
Thank you.